Lesson 3.1 deals with the primary and secondary markets. We will talk about what the primary and secondary markets are and some specific transactions that take place in each of these markets relating to stocks and to bonds. First, we'll start with a definition of the primary and the secondary markets. The first thing to note is that the primary and secondary markets are not physical locations. They refer instead to a type of transaction. So the primary market is the market in which a security first trades upon its primary distribution, when it is first sold to investors by the issuer. This means that in the primary market, the investment has not existed prior to this. The issuing company is bringing a new investment to the public for sale. So it's a primary distribution of that investment. It has not existed before. It may be that the company has already issued some shares in the past and they're issuing new shares, but these particular new shares have never existed before. So that's a primary market transaction. In contrast, the secondary market is the market where the trading doesn't take place between the issuer and the investor. It takes place between two investors. So in this case, we're dealing with securities that are already in existence. So for instance, ABC Company issues stock for the first time to investors. That stock is purchased by investors on the primary market, and then 3 months later, when the investor decides to sell that stock to another investor, this is done on the secondary market. So in the primary market, the person or entity that's receiving the funds is an issuer. It's a company or a government. In the secondary market, the person that's receiving the funds is another investor. The next two slides will deal with the specific names that we have for a few primary market transactions for both bonds and for stocks. The first slide that we're dealing with right now will deal with the bonds. Basically, when an issuing company or government decides to issue bonds to raise funds, they have a choice as to how they're going to make that issue available. They may choose a public offering where the issue is made available to the general investing public and virtually anyone can purchase some of that new issue. Or they may choose to place the issue privately in a private placement, which means that the new issue will be made available only to a few institutional investors. And you'll remember from previous discussions that institutional investors include large investors such as mutual funds, pension plans, and insurance companies. Now, also with shares, there are a couple of different methods of offering in the primary market, and which type the issuing company is using will really depend on whether the issuing company has already issued shares in the past before or not. If the company has formally never issued shares, perhaps was a privately owned company and is now just going public for the first time, then their issue in the primary market will be called an initial public offering. So these truly are the very first shares of this company that have been available to the public for investment. If, however, the company has previously issued shares and is just bringing a new issue of additional shares to market, so that these are new shares that haven't existed before, but they've already had shares in the market in the past, this would be called a seasoned new issue. So for instance, if I owned a company and the name of my company was Hallaker Corporation, and up until now I had only myself and some family members investing in the company with me, and I had some bank loans, and I decided that I wanted to raise further capital so that I could grow my business to a larger state, then I could take my company public and I could have an initial public offering of my shares. If, however, we're dealing with a company such as the Bank of Nova Scotia, they've been around for a number of years, have a number of shares that are currently trading, and if they decided they wanted to raise additional capital by selling more shares, they would be selling a seasoned new issue in the primary market. In the secondary market, there is also one other type of transaction that I want you to be aware of with regard to shares, and this is called a secondary offering. And this occurs when we have a company that has shares that are already in existence, and perhaps they've taken those shares or a portion of those shares off the market and are now redistributing them to the public. This would be considered a secondary market transaction because the shares already did exist, but because the issuing company is involved, then we have a specific name for it, so we call it a secondary offering. So we don't have any new shares being issued here, but the issuing company is still involved.